Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Hey everyone, Craig Baird here. Before I begin today's story, I want to take a moment and ask that you check me out on Patreon at www.patreon.com/CanadaEHX. There are several tiers with great benefits, from ad-free content to t-shirts and other cool stuff. And don't forget, you can also donate directly to the show at www.canadaehx.com. Just click donate. It helps keep this show going. Okay, on with the show.
John Herbert had a gift for the written word. As an 18-year-old in the 1940s, he put that talent to work in the advertising department at Eaton's. And what his co-workers at the department store didn't know was that Herbert liked to wear women's clothing and perform in drag shows. And while it hurt nobody and brought him joy, his after-work activities were generally unacceptable in society. And at the time, it came with risk because in Canada, a man wearing women's clothing in public was completely illegal. Every time Herbert went out dressed as a woman, he was skirting the law. Aside from that, he endured taunts and threats and even assaults from others. In 1947, a group of young men tried to rob him. Police intervened quickly to arrest the perpetrators, but the thieves falsely claimed that Herbert had solicited sex from them. As soon as police saw that Herbert was a man dressed as a woman, he became the villain. He was arrested and charged. Herbert, the victim of a robbery, was sentenced to 4 months in prison. His attackers received no punishment. But in the end, John Herbert had the last laugh because he took the pain of that incident and turned it into literary gold. I'm Craig Baird, this is Canadian History X, and today we are looking at Canada's drag history. Before we begin, what is drag? RuPaul Charles, the world-famous drag queen and creator of the award-winning show RuPaul's Drag Race, always says, "We're all born naked, and the rest is drag." While in conversation with Oprah Winfrey, he expanded on it with digging deeper into what that means, and at its core, people are born as spiritual beings and the rest is all an illusion. We come up with the definitions about who we really are. As an art form, drag is about freedom of expression in its truest form. It is a social commentary that challenges norms and stereotypes while infusing joy and humor into it. But it's also a community. So much more than just sparkles, wigs, and a song and dance. Here's Miss Moço, one of Canada's leading drag queens.
I think first and foremost, to make it be a little more palatable for people, drag is an art form, first and foremost. Drag is a political art form as well. Like, no matter what you do, it is political. And I think people need to understand that we, as drag artists, are working as drag artists for a living. This isn't just something we do for fun.
Thanks to shows like Drag Race, it seems like drag is a new thing. And if you think about it, that reality competition debuted in the United States on February 2nd, 2009. That's 16 years ago. And even then, drag far predates television. In fact, there's evidence of drag long before Canada even existed. Among Indigenous people, gender fluidity and cross-dressing was not viewed in a negative manner as it came to be among settlers. Often termed two-spirit, these individuals were said to embody both male and female spirits. Some two-spirit individuals adopted gender roles often associated with the opposite sex or wore the clothing of the opposite sex. And in many societies, they were revered as leaders and healers and visionaries, believed to be blessed with the ability to move between genders. But even among Europeans, drag and cross-dressing has a long history. It was even accepted, but only in certain circumstances. When Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec City in New France in the early 1600s, men were often in drag as they performed Shakespeare's plays on the other side of the Atlantic. As the vessels Erebus and Terror sat encased in the ice in the Canadian Arctic in the early 1840s, Sir John Franklin and his all-male crew put on pantomime performances dressed as women to break the monotony of winter. But even during wartime, drag was a way to boost morale and forget the horrors of the battlefield. While the First World War raged in France, a drag group known as the Dumbbells performed near the front lines. Made up of soldiers from the 3rd Canadian Division, the men played a variety of skits as female impersonators with characters such as Marie from Montreal. They also did renditions of the latest popular songs as well as original material.
Sister Sybil's got a sweetheart, Sybil's found a beau. She's so keen on Joe, she won't let him go. When they start to say goodnight and stand there chin to chin.
The group's name came from the divisional patch they wore, which had a red dumbbell on a blue-gray field. And the Dumbbells became incredibly popular, often putting on 3 to 4 shows a day, and the best-known female impersonator was often credited as Ross Marjorie Hamilton. Often Shellfire interrupted shows, and on occasion the actors were commandeered to carry wounded soldiers on stretchers to first aid stations. And the world-famous troupe was created by Merton Plunkett, who was originally from Ontario. By the summer of 1918, Merton had organized and outfitted different troops, all paid for by the Canadian YMCA. And a year later, they did their first national tour. After the war, the group remained together well into the 1930s and released 27 recordings and sheet music of their songs. When Lucy Maud Montgomery saw their performance in Toronto in November 1921, she wrote in her diary, "It was incredibly funny, and I laughed as I haven't laughed in years. The female parts were all played by men, and 3 of them were the most stunning beauties I ever beheld." As their popularity grew, they went on to play shows in London's West End and at the Ambassador Theatre on Broadway. But with financial difficulties looming during the Great Depression and the growth of the film industry, the Dumbbells disbanded in 1932. And while men in drag was seen as something acceptable on the stage or as comedic fodder in films, members were expected to follow gender norms off the stage. This was something that Ross Marjorie Hamilton was keenly aware of. Ross Hamilton was born in Pugwash, Nova Scotia in 1892 and served as an ambulance driver during the First World War. A talented singer, he was asked to join the Dumbbells and took the stage name of Marjorie. He made his own outfits out of tent canvas, curtains, and pillow feathers, and he became so popular as a woman that when the show was over, he quickly changed out of his costume to avoid being mobbed by other soldiers. One soldier stated of him, "When Ross marched into a mess in costume, every officer would stand to attention until he was seated. Then, in a truck driver's voice, he'd call for a drink, and the illusion soon vanished." Hamilton was often considered to be the star of the group. And when the Second World War began, he once again decided to do his duty and serve his country. And even though he was now in his late 40s, he served with the Royal Canadian Army Corps. But he also never lost his love of performing. During the Second World War, he joined a group called Chin Up, where he performed as a middle-aged female opera singer. And while performing as a woman on stage was fine with the military, being gay was not. And Ross Hamilton was. So when his sexual orientation was discovered, he was discharged for, quote, reason other than medical. That was code for how the military removed members of the LGBTQ community. As a result, Hamilton spent his last years living in a log cabin in Nova Scotia, working in his garden and helping others in the community. And he passed away in 1965. If you're a long-time listener, you know that progress for the LGBTQ plus community got much worse before they got better. And that included drag performers who could put on a show and make people laugh, but unless it was Halloween parties where men appearing as women was acceptable, cross-dressing was not allowed. After the Second World War, as Canada became more conservative, things became more difficult. In 1948, the Criminal Code of Canada was amended to charge any man wearing women's clothing with gross indecency, and the only way to avoid getting arrested was to have at least 3 pieces of men's clothing on. This meant that when police raided drag bars, performers had to show that they were wearing men's underwear under their dresses. If they wore female underwear, they were charged. But the more the government oppressed, the harder the community pushed back. Ted North was a famous Canadian drag queen and gay civil rights activist during this time. Born in Edmonton, Alberta, he grew up in Cooking Lake, and he moved to America for school and to become a nurse. And this is where he began to develop his activism through connections he made in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Portland. In Portland, North became involved with the Imperial Court System, one of the oldest and largest LGBT organizations in the world. He then returned to Canada to fight against the laws governing cross-dressing publicly and at great risk. On August 18, 1958, North organized a protest on the steps of the Vancouver courthouse. Joined by 4 other drag performers, North held up a sign that said, "I am a human being." The protesters were soon chased away by police. And as time went on, his protests grew. North often appeared in full drag to attract attention from those passing by. And to ensure he was not arrested for dressing as a woman, he stuffed his bra with 2 pairs of men's socks and wore women's underwear, thereby meeting the odd requirements set by the law. In the 1960s, he began a letter-writing campaign to push for the end of the criminalization of homosexuality. His letters eventually caught the attention of NDP leader Tommy Douglas and Justice Minister Pierre Trudeau, which led to the overhaul of the criminal code. Bill C-150 passed in 1969, which, as you know, decriminalized homosexuality, kind of. And by then, Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister, and he phoned North to share the news. And when someone answered the phone, Trudeau asked for "Your Majesty," referencing North's official title as Empress of Canada. North had been crowned in 1964 by the long-standing Rose Court of Portland, Oregon, as part of the imperial court system that I had mentioned earlier. And in 1971, North founded the Canadian court system after being inspired by attending a ball in Portland, and thus became the international court system. North was Empress of Canada until they died of cancer in 2014. 3 years later, Ted North Lane was named in Vancouver in their honor. Along with Ross Hamilton and Ted North, there was Russell Aldred. Aldred was born in 1931 in Bowmanville, Ontario, and from a young age he loved to perform. In 1961, he took part in drag shows under the name of Anita Mode. 8 years later, he adopted the stage name of Michelle DeBerry. In the 1970s, DeBerry was joined on the scene by Hosanna, the first Canadian play about and starring a drag queen. Written by Michael Tremblay, the entire story takes place in the apartment of Hosanna, a drag queen who dresses as Cleopatra. The play dealt with gender identity, sexual expressions of homosexuality, and sexual identity. And the Montreal Gazette said it was well received by the audience in 1973, stating, quote, "They thundered their applause for Hosanna, a drama which must rank as a milestone, not only for the playwright, but for Quebec theatre." A year later, it made its debut on Broadway. In 1977, though, Outrageous, a Canadian comedy drama film written and directed by Richard Benner, was one of the first gay-themed films to receive widespread theatrical release in North America. It starred Canadian drag queen Craig Russell as Robin Turner, an inept hairdresser who does the hair and makeup for local drag shows. Wanting to perform in drag, Robin gets his chance after winning first prize at a Halloween costume contest where he dressed as Tallulah Bankhead, the American actress from the 1940s. The film earned Russell a Silver Bear for Best Actor from the Berlin International Film Festival and a Canadian Film Award nomination for Best Actor. And Russell later starred in the sequel to Outrageous and released an album called Glamour Monster in 1987. Sadly, he died only 3 years later from complications related to AIDS. And through all of this, Russell Aldred was performing as Michelle DeBerry, and he had spent years performing with the drag troupe The Great Imposters across the country. and by day Aldred was a shoe salesman. He was one of the best drag performers in Toronto. He was given the title of Empress of Toronto in the Imperial Court system and often performed for charity fundraisers especially related to HIV/AIDS awareness. In 2007, he was the Grand Marshal of the Toronto Pride Parade. On August 15, 2016, he was awarded the title of the world's oldest performing drag queen by the Guinness World Records. In 2020, at the age of 89, he appeared as a judge in the 7th episode of the first season of Canada's Drag Race. And in 2022, with dementia setting in, he moved into a long-term care facility. His outfits and jewelry were sold to help a new generation of drag performers fill their wardrobes. And, as of the recording of this episode, he's still alive. While drag queens have taken center stage in pop culture, drag kings have also been part of the scene for decades. Now, the first mention of a drag king in print happened in 1972, but really, women dressing as men for stage performances dates back over 2,500 years to the Tang Dynasty of China. In the 20th century, drag kings have been more marginalized than drag queens. I even found this in my research. While there was ample information about drag queens in Canada's history, finding stories of drag kings was like looking for a needle in a haystack. It is only recently that drag kings are getting their time in the spotlight thanks to what is being called a renaissance of drag king culture. Some notable kings include Murray Hill, an American comedian and entertainer who's been performing since the 1990s. Today, there are many drag kings making a name for themselves, including Natalie Claude, who had worked with Cirque du Soleil as Jeeves, a male clown. There's even Canada's a Drag, a series that aired on CBC Gem in 2018 that featured both drag kings and drag queens. But in the 2020s, there's no drag king bigger in Canada than Meags Fitzgerald. She has performed as Hercusleaze in front of small crowds in rural towns and in front of 30,000 people in Montreal. And she helped explain the difference between drag kings and drag queens.
So a drag queen is usually a gay man or a trans woman who is dressing up in hyperfemininity and usually, but not always, lip syncing a song by a female artist and performing that on stage. But queens can also do, or any drag artist can also do, like stand-up comedy, puppetry, live music, whatever. It doesn't have to be lip syncing. So by that same logic, a king is often then a cis woman or a trans man who is dressing up in masculine presenting identity in sort of an extra big flamboyant way.
Fitzgerald added that in the 2020s, there's been a shift among drag artists to deconstruct the gender binary.
The idea is like if all gender is performative, all these social constructs were created, then anyone can really present any gender and just call it drag. So if a cisgender man wants to be a drag king, I'm not going to say that his drag's not valid because he's not doing a direct gender switch. You know, there doesn't have to be an actual gender subversion. People can present any kind of sexuality, any kind of gender that they want, and call it drag. And most people in the drag community now are cool with that. That's sort of the progression how that this art form has evolved.
As Mama Ru has always said, we are born naked and the rest is drag. But because of RuPaul's influence as a drag queen, many people who attend local drag shows that aren't televised are surprised to see drag kings on stage. And a big reason for that is the lack of representation.
Most people are very familiar with the term drag queen by now, and it's still pretty common that when I perform, someone will come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, I didn't know a drag king was a thing. You're the first one I've ever seen." And I'm trying to change that, not just for my own purposes, but because drag kings have existed just as long, if not arguably longer, in the modern tradition than drag queens. But we haven't had the spotlight that RuPaul's Drag Race put on the drag queen community about 20 years ago when that show was first created. So it's kind of left our community, the king community, lagging behind in terms of opportunities for employment, the amount of money in the industry, how polished we can look, and that kind of thing.
RuPaul was at the forefront of the growing presence of drag in film and TV during the 1980s and 1990s. In 1993, RuPaul recorded the dance house album Supermodel of the World, which was released through the rap label Tommy Boy, spawning the dance track hit Supermodel, You Better Work. It peaked at 45 on the Billboard Hot 100 and charted on the UK singles chart, peaking at the top 40 at 39. Thanks to the radio airplay, heavy rotation on the music video on MTV, and television appearances on popular programs like The Arsenio Hall Show, RuPaul's popularity grew. In 1994, he released Don't Go Breaking My Heart, a duet with Elton John. Then came the groundbreaking modeling contract with MAC Cosmetics. Suddenly, billboards and magazines all over the world featured RuPaul in full drag, often with the text, I am a MAC girl. By 1995, he was appearing in the soap opera All My Children and in the Brady Bunch movies, in which he played Jan's female guidance counselor. And that was just the beginning, because RuPaul is single-handedly the most famous drag performer in the entire world, which is why so much of what people think drag is comes from RuPaul and the show that was created 16 years ago, RuPaul's Drag Race, which became a franchise. As of 2025, the original series RuPaul's Drag Race has produced 17 seasons and inspired the spin-off shows RuPaul's Drag U, RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars, RuPaul's Secret Celebrity Drag Race, and RuPaul's Drag Race Global All-Stars. The companion series RuPaul's Drag Race Untucked and numerous international adaptations, including British, Australian, and New Zealand versions, all hosted by RuPaul, as well as Chilean, Thai, Canadian, Dutch, Spanish, Italian, French, Filipino, Belgium, Swedish, Mexican, Brazilian, German, and South African editions, and in an international versus the world competitions hosted in the United Kingdom and Canada, plus all-star competitions in Spain and France and Slasian Royal in the Philippines. 3 drag fan conventions have also been created: RuPaul's DragCon LA, RuPaul's DragCon NYC, and RuPaul's DragCon UK. But before RuPaul, with very few exceptions, cross-dressing was done for comedic value. And one of the most famous examples would be Mrs. Doubtfire, starring Robin Williams as a father who pretends to be a British female nanny to stay closer to his children after a separation from his wife, played by Sally Field. And even though the movie hasn't aged well in some respects, it was still an early glimpse of drag for many performers like Miss Moço.
I mean, if I really think about it, it's probably like Mrs. Doubtfire or I feel like there's definitely Disney movies where characters threw on a wig or something. I had no idea what drag was.
For Meags Fitzgerald, her exposure to drag came in her late 20s, and at first she wasn't quite comfortable with what she was seeing due to how she was raised.
I had 2 friends in university who, both lesbians, who were sort of experimenting with drag stuff, and they were cross-dressing, and I was raised quite religious. And even though I knew I was queer in high school and I came out as bisexual, I had a lot of stuff to unpack there still and didn't realize really how much internalized homophobia I had. And I remember looking at these 2 friends of mine and being like, oh my God, that is so embarrassing. Why are they doing that? Like, what a horrific way to draw attention to yourself. Like, I was not on board at all. And I say that now because it's, I think, a good indicator of how much perceptions can change, right? By experiencing something.
But whether it was shows or films, for many performers, they dipped their toes into the drag world and began to explore the unique art form like Miss Moço did.
It was so weird. I didn't understand it, even though I personally was starting to dress a little more androgynous and had a fascination with heels and dresses and wanted to wear them. And then an ex-boyfriend at the time, their family was confused why I wanted to do that. And then I instantly was inner child again, just went in on myself. I was like, nope, we don't do that. And then one day I just hopped on the stage, I performed, and realized that this whole time I am a drag queen.
Meags Fitzgerald's path to becoming a drag king began in her late 20s when she was training as an amateur circle aerialist. Performing in tight bodysuits and having people, especially men, looking at her body in a way that was erotic made her uncomfortable. So she decided to take that situation and subvert it by becoming a drag king.
And I thought, this is my sport, this is my art, this is not meant to be erotic. I don't want the male gaze on me in that sense. And so I thought, well, what's a way to subvert that, to kind of claim back this as a powerful performance for myself? And I thought, well, I could cross-dress. And I realized that by cross-dressing, I was saying, okay, if you're repulsed by me cross-dressing right now, then great. I want you to be upset. I want you to look away from my body. This performance is not for you. And I realized in that moment how powerful it was to try to embody a masculine energy as a woman.
Miss Moço began performing in drag a decade ago, and even just that short amount of time, there's been a real shift in perceptions.
Yeah, I would say it's a huge shift. And I feel like with almost everything in the world, that year of 2020 helped with that shift. Helped is not the right word, because so many local queer spaces closed down, especially in the West End here in Toronto. So we lost a lot of where performers could go and feel safe and work on their craft of drag. I think also with RuPaul's Drag Race, the perception of what drag should be has changed, and not for the better, because all drag is valid. Anyone can do their kind of drag, but Drag Races kind of told people, like, this is the mold that you have to follow. And it's getting better throughout the years. We start to see a little more representation on that show.
Even as drag has become part of pop culture's mainstay, there has been pushback. At an August 16th, 2023 event, where drag storytime pioneers Faye and Fluffy greeted children at an amphitheater in Mississauga, police had to keep protesters away. And it was a similar situation in other parts of the country. The day before the Faye and Fluffy event, protesters and counter-protesters got into a shoving match at the Henningleaf Library in Calgary as drag queen Skirt Browning read to children. Things were so bad that in St. Catherine, Quebec in April 2023, the Drag Story Hour event had to be moved to a secret location just to escape protests. And while drag performers deal with protests and in some cases death threats, getting on stage continues to be the best way to push for progress. Meags Fitzgerald has performed across Canada, the United States, and in Europe as Hercusleaze. And she says that although there are vocal opponents, there are many who support drag as Canada becomes more accepting and tolerant.
A few years ago, invited to be one of the headliners at Napanee Pride in Ontario, and I kind of, I'll admit, sort of rolled my eyes at first because I was like, Napanee Pride, like I'm doing all these other big cities' prides this year. And I was so wrong in that assumption that it would just be not a big deal, because actually it was Napanee's first ever pride. And it was really incredible to witness what it meant for this little community to have their first ever pride celebration, and the courage it takes to maybe out yourself to your community and walk down the street in a parade.
Miss Moço was born in Cambridge and raised in Galt, Ontario, and attended George Brown College and Humber College to study fashion, business, and photography. She moved to Toronto early in her career and is the resident host of a drag brunch at the Drake Hotel in Toronto every Saturday. She also founded a drag pageant in Portugal in 2017, and in 2022, she competed on Season 3 of Canada's Drag Race. She says drag is not something everyone has to love, but it should be respected.
At the end of the day, I just want people to respect what we do. You don't have to love it, you don't have to like it. Just respect and know that we're in our lane and you're in yours. We will stick to whatever we want to do and just let people live.
LGBTQ activist Jim Egan, who I talked about 2 weeks ago, said that visibility created acceptance. Social media is playing a big part in that now, allowing drag queens and kings to reach people across the world. And it's something that Miss Moço has used so well.
I think There are many different ways you can approach social media. You could take that route of a more educational type of content creator where you are using your platform to educate people. You could also just use it as a platform to have fun, which that's the route I've taken, where I want to just shed that I want to be perfect all the time and just go on, make a fool of myself, and show people that I am actually quite fun and funny.
From TV shows devoted to drag to local shows, drag is more and more available. And if you are like me and you're in bed by 9:30 p.m. and may not be able to stay up for a drag show, there are even drag brunches. And as I mentioned, Miss Moço hosts a weekly drag brunch in Toronto.
There's only one drag brunch to see in Toronto, and it's mine at the Drake Hotel every Saturday. I do 2 seatings, so we've got the 11 a.m. for the people who like to wake up early, and then we've got the 1:30 who may need a little rest before they go and have a midday party. And I am not going anywhere. My brunch is staying strong, so if you are in the city of Toronto, come see me at the Drake Hotel.
At the top of this episode, I told you about John Herbert, who was sent to prison because he was dressed as a woman. In prison, he continued to cross-dress and was beaten by guards and assaulted by other inmates. When he was released, he worked odd jobs around North America before settling back in Toronto in 1955 to become a playwright. And in 1964, he wrote Fortune and Men's Eyes based on his time in jail. A year later, it was staged at the Stratford Festival Workshop, directed by Bruno Gerussi of Beachcombers fame. Then he took his play to New York City. In 1966, Dustin Hoffman workshopped it at the New York Actors Studio, and it made its off-Broadway debut 1 year later. From here, the play spread across the continent with productions in Chicago and San Francisco, Montreal, and Toronto. In 1971, an award-winning film adaptation was released to great acclaim. The play has been performed in over 100 countries and been translated into 40 languages. Fortune and Men's Eyes is now the most widely produced play in the history of Canadian theatre. An artistic rose that emerged from the bigoted dirt of Canada's past. I hope you enjoyed that episode and our look at Canada's drag history. This show is researched, produced, and written by me, Craig Baird, with the help of Dila Velasquez. Audio production and design by Rosalind Kufor. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review to help other people find these amazing stories. And there are so many for you to sink your teeth into. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please check out my other podcasts, From John to Justin, Canada, A Yearly Journey, Pucks and Cups, and Canada's Great War. We love hearing from you, so if you have a show topic you want me to cover, email me at craig@canadaehx.com or stop by my website and social media. I'll include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X.